We start our next series today, and it's from the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. And it's a great book. The first half of the book looks at Daniel's life. The second half looks at some of the visions that he has. So what's the background behind this book? In about 605 BC, as a teenager, Daniel is captured by the Babylonian army in their first attack against the city of Jerusalem, and he then spends the rest of his life in service in the royal Babylonian court. And it's probably about 540 BC, about 65 years after coming as a teenager, that he wrote the book of Daniel that we've got in our Bible today. Now at the time, Babylon was considered the most beautiful city in the world. And when we talk about the seven wonders of the ancient world, one of them was the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. And so we would go to Babylon just to look at the prettiness of the gardens and the flowers and the fragrance. Now, Daniel lived for 72 years in Babylon, and he lived for the entire duration of the Babylonian Empire. So during his lifetime, there were 6 different kings. He survived the attack and occupation by the Medes and the Persians, and he died about 2 years after the first Jews from Babylon were allowed to go back to Jerusalem. So who wrote the book of Daniel? On 6 different occasions, Daniel is described as being the author of the book. So what do we find there in the first chapter? Now Daniel and 3 of his friends, 3 other exiles, had been called to serve the Babylonian king. We find that there in Daniel chapter 1. Now as we come to the book of Daniel, it's interesting how often a pressure group will have an agenda for what they think should happen to our society. And it's fascinating how words is one of the ways that they can create their agenda. Now, when I was a little kid, if someone said they're gay, it just meant that they were a very, very happy person. And there was a song back in the 60s about being gay. And of course, it just meant that you were a really happy, happy-go-lucky person. That word has now changed, and no one ever uses the word gay to describe a happy person anymore. It's got a new agenda. The word has changed. And when it comes to the idea of tolerance, as a little kid, tolerance came from the Latin verb to bear with, and it meant that people could have differing opinions, but you could respect each other's opinions without going to war. Now, tolerance for many is that you will agree with my view, and if you don't agree with me, you're intolerant and you're a bully. So intolerance now refers to the fact that if you differ, means you're a bully or a bigot or a racist. And it's amazing how many terms people can find for you having a differing opinion. And as we come to Daniel, we'll find that these very things were enforced upon Daniel and those other Jews who came as exiles when they came to Babylon. So what are 3 things that Nebuchadnezzar did to try and change the mindset of the Jewish people that he captured? Now the first we find there in Daniel chapter 1 verse 2. Nebuchadnezzar took some of the sacred objects from the temple of God and he placed them into the treasure house of his God. And so what happens is that if you were in Babylon and you come all the way from Israel, you knew that that which was most sacred was now a servant object in the Babylonian temple and treated like dirt and treated as worthless, and therefore made you feel that your faith was worthless. It's interesting, if you look to when the Russians became a communist country, the first thing they did to the churches, they became schools, they became public buildings, they became houses, they became anything other than being a church. All the churches were confiscated from the land. So the first thing we find here is that they devalue things that are religious. The second thing is there's involved their training in the culture of Babylon. So there in Daniel chapter 1 verse 3. Bring to the palace all the young men of Judah's royal family and other noble families. In other words, the key players of Jerusalem who have been brought to Babylon in its captivity. Now it's interesting who they select. It says in verse 4, select only strong, healthy, good-looking young men. Make sure they are well-versed in every branch of learning, are gifted with knowledge and good judgment, and are suited to serve in the royal palace. In other words, pick the people who will be peer leaders that others admire and make sure they do things our way. So he's got to train these young men in the language and the literature of Babylon. Get them to know our ways, speak our language, and transform their whole mindset from being Jewish people that they become Babylonian people. Then in verse 5, they were to be trained for 3 years and they would enter the royal service and they would learn the ways of Babylon. And the thought about learning the ways is they take on the Babylonian lifestyle and culture and beliefs and knowledge framework. Now, the third thing they did to try and deculture the people from Israel is this. Now, each of the three people that were with Daniel and Daniel himself had godly names. So Daniel's names means God is my judge. Now, his name is changed to Belshazzar, meaning protect the life of the king. Which king? The Babylonian king. And so instead of having a name focused on God, his name is now focused on Babylon. Now, the second person there, now the other interesting about Daniel is, as we go through the book of Daniel, nearly everybody keeps on calling him Daniel. No one ever uses his name Belshazzar. So there's a bit of a strength in his character to say, no, that's not my name. My name is Daniel. This is who I am. Now, Hananiah, his name means grace, mercy, gift of God. And he now is called Shadrach, meaning command of Aku, the Babylonian god of the moon. Now for Michelle, his name means who is what God is. His name becomes Meshkach, meaning who is as Aku is. So it's a total change of his name. Then the next one, Azaziah, means Yahweh or God has helped. His name becomes Meshkach, meaning who is as Aku is. Then Azariah, his name means Yahweh or God has helped. His name becomes Abednego, meaning servant of Nebo, the Babylonian god of wisdom. Your name and my name give us identity. And if you ask people, you'll regularly find out, I was named after an aunt, an uncle, a grandfather, a family friend. There's quite often a story that goes behind different people's names. I know with my grandkids, my son and daughter-in-law said each of them will have somewhere in their name a Bible name, a God name. So the 4 Jews that we have here, their names focused on God. And so to say their name had a godly message. Now their names have been changed to give glory to the Babylonian gods. Imagine tomorrow the government passes a law and says, we're going to change your names. And you and I might get the name Buddha, or Pisces, or Hare Krishna. How would that change your perception of yourself, be given a name that you know doesn't fit who you are? So what's their response? So they've been manipulated, attacked. There's an aggressive undergirding to everything they believe and hold to be true. And there's whispers, there's confrontation, and there's fights to try and make sure these people become Babylonian. We find in verse 8 it says, Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and wine given to them by the king. The issue is not that it was meat. The issue is not that it was wine. The issue is that all the food they ate in Babylon had been offered to the Babylonian gods. And there's a sense of uncomfortableness to be eating food that was wrongly associated. So what do we find there? He asked the chief of staff for permission to not eat the unacceptable foods. So there's a bit of thought, and then verse 10. If you become pale and thin compared to the other youth your age, I'm afraid the king will have to behead you. So it's a sense of, if you don't eat our meat and don't drink our wine, we'll just cut your head off. So it's a pretty confrontational situation that has come. Daniel very wisely says to him in verse 12, please test us for 10 days on a diet of vegetables and water. At the end of the 10 days, see how we look compared to the other young men who are eating the king's food. Then make your decision in light of what you see. Let the facts speak for themselves. If we are deteriorated, have your say. But if we're not, take counsel of what's happening. So then in verse 15, at the end, Daniel and his 3 friends looked healthier and better nourished than the young men who had been eating the food assigned by the king. So after that, the attendant fed them only vegetables and said the food and wine provided for the others. They had made a stand saying, we are not going to be part of your idolatry. And this is where we will draw our line. So what happens to these young men? Verse 17. God gave these 4 young men an unusual aptitude for understanding every aspect of literature and wisdom. And God gave Daniel the special ability to interpret the meaning of visions and dreams. And whenever the king consulted him in any matters requiring wisdom and balanced judgment, he found these 4 10 times more capable than any of the magicians or enchanters in his entire kingdom. What has happened? These 4 men maintain their godliness, their passion for God, their desire to serve Yahweh as King of Kings. They never moved from where their foundation was. But they also had the insight and wisdom to understand the Babylonian culture. And so they were able to speak to it in a godly way that many others would not understand. I know for myself, after I became a Christian, I was quite fascinated by other beliefs, as I had been before I got saved. And so there are a number of areas that have gone to great lengths to understand those religions. And I love it. Like last January, I met with a whole lot of Baha'i people down the beach and had a great time chatting with them. And their comment was, we can't believe you know so much about our Baha'i faith. And my thought is, I know about your faith because I want to win you for Christ and I want to understand where you come from so I can tell you how to get from where you are to where you need to find God. And so we had a great conversation. They said they love chatting. Said very rarely do they meet anybody who understands what they believe or understands the differences between Baha'i and Christianity. And the joy at the end of the conversation was one of the guys says, can you please explain to us the Christian faith so we can understand what you believe? What a great opening to the gospel being presented. Why? Because they understood Baha'i religion. What's Daniel and his friends doing? Understanding the Babylonian faith, not to take it on board, but to be able to speak to it in how Jesus is different. Now, the next thing we find is in chapter 2, is the idea of the dreams. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and we find there in Daniel 2, verse 3. I've had a dream that deeply troubles me, says Nebuchadnezzar, and I must know what it means. Now, typically, the astrologers ask the king, long live the king, tell us the dream, and we will tell you what it means. But the king looks sternly in the eyes of the astrologers and says, I am serious about this. I don't tell me what my dream was and what it means. You'll be torn limb by limb and your house will be turned to rubble. So it's pretty strong words by Nebuchadnezzar. Basically, you've got to tell me what I dreamt and what it means, otherwise you're dead. Then verse 6, but if you tell me what I've dreamed and what a dream means, I'll give you many wonderful gifts and honours. But tell me the dream and what it means. And the next line in verse 7, you can understand the astrologers' thinking. They say, please, your majesty, tell us the dream and we will tell you what it means. Because there's no way they could guess his dream. But the king replies, I know what you're doing. You're stalling for time because you know that I am serious. Verse 11 is very clear. It says the king's demand is impossible. No one except the gods can tell you the dream, and they do not live here among people. And of course, that's a whisper because Jesus came and did live amongst us. So when you say, what was God like? You say, look to Jesus. Now the king was furious there in verse 12 when he heard this, and he ordered them all, the wise men of Babylon, to be executed. And of course, when you think about it, Daniel, his 3 friends, are also wise men. Then verse 13, because the king's decree, men were sent to find and kill Daniel and his friends. Now when Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, came to kill them, Daniel handles the situation with wisdom and discretion. Why? Because God is working in his life. And he just asks Arioch, why has the king issued such a harsh decree? So Arioch explained what had happened. So Daniel went to see the king and requested more time to tell the king what the dream meant. Then Daniel went home, told his friends what had happened. He urged them to ask the God of heaven to show them his mercy by telling them the secret so they would not be executed along with the other wise men of Babylon. So what does Daniel do? He seeks the prayer council of the three friends he had there in Babylon. When you and I face issues in life, the first thing we should quite often do is give it to God in prayer. And sometimes our prayer is, God, I have no idea what I should do right now. I know you do. Reveal your will to me. And you may share that prayer point with some other prayer partners and say, can you also pray with me? So there in verse 19, that night the secret was revealed to Daniel in a vision. And it's interesting Daniel's response. He praises the God of heaven. And the next part's quite powerful because he takes up a number of characteristics of God. Now, why is it so important? In the time of Daniel, people had regional micro-gods. Your suburb or your city would have a god. And that god would be different to the next suburb or next city across. And there were gods all over the place. And so gods were basically seen as regional friends. This is not Daniel's view of his God. He sees his God as Lord of the earth, or the Lord of all that is seen and unseen, the Lord of Babylon as much as the Lord of Jerusalem. So how's he responding in his prayer? Now listen to how powerful his words are. Praise the name of God forever, for he has all wisdom and all power. He controls the course of world events. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the scholars. There's a true sense that all true knowledge is God's knowledge. Now it's interesting, atheists will quite often talk about the God of gaps. So if there's something you don't understand, that's, you say, oh, that's what God understands that. And so what happens is as time goes by, as you get more and more knowledge, your God gets smaller and smaller because he's the God of the things you don't know. Daniel's not saying God is the God of the don't knows. He's saying God is the God of everything. All that is known and all that is not known is under God's command. And all the world events under God's command. We may be shocked, but who picked Trump to be president of America? God. Only history would say whether God picked Trump to be a punishment or a blessing upon America. Because I think sometimes God allows kings and leaders into power to bring judgment upon a country or bring blessing upon a country. So he says he gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the scholars. He reveals deep and mysterious things and knows what lies hidden in darkness, though he is surrounded by light. In other words, there's nothing outside of his scope. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors, for you have given me wisdom and strength. You have told me what we asked you and revealed to us what the king demanded. Daniel is not saying, look how bright I am. He's saying, look how blessed I am that God has revealed his will. So Daniel interprets the dream. So there in verse 26, the king said to Daniel, is this true? Can you tell me what my dream was and what it means? And Daniel's answer is very good. There are no wise men, no enchanters, magicians or fortune tellers who can reveal to you God's secret. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in the future. Now I'll tell you your dream and the visions you say. Daniel very clearly says, I am telling you, but this is coming from my God. You can nearly say, my God, you took all these possessions from the temple and put them into your temple. This God is actually Lord of all. While your majesty was sleeping, you dreamed about coming events. He has revealed secrets, has shown you what is going to happen. And it's not because I am wiser than anybody else that I know the secret of your dream, but because God wants you to understand what was in your heart. Then in verse 31, in your vision, your majesty, you saw standing before you a huge shining statue of a man, a frightening sight. The head of the statue was made of fine gold, the chest and arms of silver, the belly and the thighs are bronze, its legs are iron, its feet a combination of iron and baked clay. As you watched, a rock was cut from the mountain. And so there's a sense that the vision that Nebuchadnezzar has is described in detail by Daniel. Then in verse 36, that was a dream. Now let me tell the king what it means. So step one, what was the dream? Daniel says, this is your dream vividly and clearly. Step two, this is what it means. Your majesty, you are the greatest of kings. The God of heaven has given you sovereignty, power, strength, and honor. In other words, my God gave you your power. Don't think it was yours to take in the first place. Then verse 38, he has made you the ruler over all the inhabited world, has put even the wild animals and birds under your control. You are the head of gold. But after your kingdom will come another kingdom inferior to yours that will rise to take your place. After that kingdom has fallen, a third kingdom by bronze that will rise. And he goes through and gives details to what the dream was that Nebuchadnezzar had had. He was very clear and very precise. Then in verse 44, going down a bit, during the reigns of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed and never conquered. It will crush all these kingdoms into nothingness and it will stand forever. And of course, what kingdom is Daniel talking about? Jesus and his lordship and the coming reign of Christ. It goes on to say, the great God was showing the king what will happen in the future. The dream is true and its meaning is certain. Now, Daniel does not step back by giving God the glory. He affirms over and over again that this dream and the interpretation had come to him by God. What's Nebuchadnezzar's response? Verse 46. King Nebuchadnezzar throws himself down before Daniel and worships him. Of course, Daniel would not want to be worshipped because worship is to God alone. And he commands his people to offer sacrifice and burn sweet incense before him. And the king said to Daniel, truly your God is the greatest of gods, the Lord over kings, a revealer of mysteries. For you have been able to reveal this secret. Then Daniel is given a position of high authority. He's to rule over the whole province of Babylon, as well as being chief over his wise men. Daniel had been taken to Babylon to be moulded in the image of Babylon. God now uses Daniel to become the one who moulds the kingdom and the destiny of Babylon with a Christ-like manner. And at Daniel's request, his three friends are also put in charges of the provinces in Babylon. As we go through this story, what are some of the things that makes us stand out? Will you and I face conflict? Yes, we will. But God can be in the midst of our conflicts. Does sometimes our worldly politics overwhelm us? Yes. But God is in control of the politics. God is in control of Trump as much as he is of Putin, as much as he is of Morrison and our government in Australia. Are there times that we feel that we are folding and failing? Yes. Are there times that the enemy looks like he is winning? Yes. But on the day of judgment, it is Jesus who is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. We will go through harsh times and we'll go through times of blessing. And God is in the midst of every one of these. What does Daniel teach us? In all situations, put God first, no matter what the cost. We need to ask ourselves, are my desires focused on what the Scripture teaches? Are my prayers expressing the intimacy of a relationship with a loving God? Or do I pray as if God is an arm's length away from me? Is holiness our desire as it was for Daniel's? And the question we need to think about from this sermon is, what does it mean to live with Jesus as our Lord in every aspect of our life? Let's just finish in prayer. Father God, as we go through the book of Daniel, you remind us that you are Lord of all, that there is nothing in our newspaper that is beyond your control. And Father God, may we live for holiness, a passion to share your word, and a hunger for your return. Amen.